Howdy, folks, and welcome to Frigid Reads, the video edition. Although this isn't really a review so much as a set of final thoughts. Now, we usually review books, graphic novels, sometimes films or television series that are adaptations of those. This, however, I'm mostly going to be giving you my thoughts on vampires and our second Fangsgiving. Fangsgiving is a theme month where we examine a scary monster or character through these stories written or filmed about them. This year's theme was vampires, as I mentioned, which was chosen by our ever-wise patrons, who I'd like to take a moment to thank for their support. It's their votes that decide what gets reviewed, folks. So if you'd like a voice in that, come on down, join us for as little as $1 a month. The link is in the description. Anywho, let's move on. Vampires, at least the ones that show up in Western media, are heavily based on the beliefs and folklore from the Balkans region of Europe. That's in the southeast, between Turkey and Italy, Poland and Greece, that whole area right there. And from those myths, transmitted into English literature is where we get what we have today. Now, that happened towards the end of the Victorian era, and what's interesting is how much stays the same from the very first stories to today. For example, Vampire, the first published English literature story of vampires. The main character is confronting the monster who moves through our society disguised as a nobleman to prey on the innocent and vulnerable. The supernatural elements that are there really kind of hazy and subjective, but by the time you get to Carmilla, who is the first lady vampire, they're really cemented into place. And 20 years after Carmilla, you have Dracula, which just that's kind of the trope maker for vampires right there. By the way, Dracula was the focus of our first Thanksgiving in 2020. Feel free to jump back and take a look at those reviews. Now that I think about it, it's really interesting how easily you can update Carmilla and just play completely straight, and it would fit right in as a modern vampire story. Just kind of food for thought there. That's not to say that there aren't variations on vampires. Um, for example, Blade does away with most of the traditional weaknesses just to focus on silver stakes through the heart. But we do keep returning to those same weaknesses. Uh, Garlic, fire, sunlight. You can kill them with wood through the chest or decapitation. We also keep returning to the same MO for vampires. They either are or pose as members of the upper class and use power and privilege as a cover to feed on people. Most of their victims tend to come from the lower class or from groups of people that are just outright ignored by most of society. To give you an example, Carmilla kills a dozen peasant women while grooming her main victim, Laura. And Dracula himself kills a number of prostitutes and other lower class people while slowly turning Lucy, his his first named victim in Dracula, into a vampire. Uh, which brings us to the other class, which is young ladies. But again, that's another class in Victorian England that was usually ignored. The people who oppose vampires, the vampire hunters, tend to be groups of people who are either vampire survivors or lost loved ones to vampires, or people on the margins of society who've directly seen how vampires operate. You see this in Blade, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, even Carmilla and Dracula. Van Helsing might be the most respected vampire hunter, but has this genius experimental doctor. He's still considered outrageous and just a little scandalous by proper society. It's also interesting what has changed, though. The Victorians, and by extension us, were very quick to abandon the whole moving corpse aspect of the vampire myth. I mean, today, vampires barely fit in with the rest of the undead menagerie. Compare them to zombies, ghosts, the other legions of undead that mostly only us nerds and gamers care about. Wraiths, rats, ghouls, liches. Unlike everyone else I've listed above, vampires are pretty. They can blend in among the living. They, in some mythologies, can even bear children with each other and with humans, forming their own secret societies while taking part in our society. Most undead creatures can't do that. Now, in early folklore, which was way more focused on them being literal corpses that got up at night, snuck into people's houses, and drained them of their blood, there's a lot more linking vampires to disease and things like that. And there's still elements of that, with vampirism sometimes being linked to sexually transmitted disease. But for the most part, we've abandoned that. And I think that's because we are less afraid of disease compared to our ancestors. I mean, even HIV has been relegated to a condition that is treatable and that you can live a long time with, just as an example. Whereas the monster in human shape that can destroy us casually with no recourse from us still remains a pertinent fear. Maybe it's a petty, spiteful boss, for example, or an abusive partner or ex, or a corrupt judge or cop, or maybe it's just society as a whole and the way it operates, leaving you feeling drained and ground down over time. Vampires at least put a face on that. And when there's a face on it, it's something you can target and you can feel some satisfaction in seeing it defeated, as opposed to just the machinery of society, right? And I think it's the fact that vampires are so human that keeps them in the spotlight. Because I don't think there's much we're afraid of compared to how much we're afraid of each other these days. I mean, ask yourself if there's any predator or creature that's more dangerous to a human being than another human being. Maybe it's that same boss, or those corrupt authority figures, or maybe it's that rough set of dudes on the bus stop that might have knives and guns, and you're worried about what they're thinking. Now, that might change given the pandemic and the increasing challenges the environment is throwing at us, and maybe we'll find things that scare us more than each other, or maybe not. Either way, the vampire has an idea and an archetype is going to keep going, and I guarantee you'll be able to use it to scare your grandkids. Just don't be surprised to see some changes made over the years. Well, those are my final thoughts. Um, Again, the 2021 Dune Part 1 film will go live on our tech site. Right now, it's patrons only, so feel free to join if you'd like to take a look at that. November is going to be devoted to Dune with a review already written for the 21 film. We're going to look at the David Lynch film. We're going to look at the novel. Until then, let me just say stay safe, folks, and keep reading.